How's everybody?
All right.
Good. You all made it through the snow? Jane did. I saw Jane.
Right. I went
Saw
on
some-
other things yesterday.
Yes.
Yeah, correct.
So,
Things are still under control.
questions?
Well, do you have an idea on, I know the snow removal budget is an issue because you'd like to use it for other things. Do you have any idea how much yesterday and?
I haven't gotten a total yet, but I know we're nowhere near
Okay.
the monies that we've set aside. I think we're fine.
Okay.
We just can't afford 2 or 3 more of these.
Yes, right.
So you're definitely going to set aside snow removal money to see.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'd like to ask you about the audit, a little more detail of the audit of the Baltimore Police Department. Is this going to be, who's going to do the audit? Have you put out a request for proposal or anything like that? I mean, where does that stand?
So I've had conversations with the Comptroller's office and with the Finance Department. What I've said is I need this done as quickly as possible, especially, so, each agency is scheduled for an overall audit. I've asked the overall audit of the police department to be moved up to this year. But there's a forensic audit of overtime that I want done. And I do believe, as I've talked to the law department, that the Comptroller's office is the best office to do this. Had conversations with the Comptroller, who says that she does have the capacity to do it. But I am going to add additional monies in the upcoming budget to the Comptroller's office so that we can have more regular audits taking place for our various departments.
What is it that you really want to find?
I just want to understand, one, I want to understand this overtime period. When you think about, and I think I said this to you all earlier, a $1.6 million every pay period overtime is just unconscionable. I mean, for me, I need to understand why we're doing that. But part of it, as was explained to me from the FOP's perspective, was that, and you've heard this, we don't have enough police officers on the street. So we've unfrozen those 200 positions. And as I said earlier, and I've said this to the Finance Department, please help me understand why you would freeze 200 positions, which would cost you on an average, and I know this doesn't include, the benefits and all of that, about $10 million. But then if you look at this overtime that's escalating currently at $40 million, there's something wrong with that picture. Here's the other thing that I've learned just in the time period of looking at doing this particular audit. There is overtime that is paid by others, and I don't know whether that's included in our overtime. For example, if ShopRite says, or if the Baltimore Marathon, for example, when I wrote that contract initially, it was to cover all costs. I understand now that it's not covering all costs, and that's a problem for me, because the initial concept was that all costs, whether it is public works or police, are to be covered by the contractor. And so we do a number of events that I don't think that the city really evaluates what those costs are. Even when we think about, Artscape and the other festivals and those kinds of things, who's paying the cost? And does that have to be overtime for police officers? Are there other entities that we could be using that would cost us less? So all of these things, to me, have to be completely understood. And I'm doing everything I can to understand, how do we get to overtime? What is a properly staffed police department? And I still believe that part of this is having a 4-day, 3-day off work week. I just don't know how that works in terms of being able to schedule it. I mean, that's 156 days that every police officer gets before we even consider their vacation. And so, oftentimes when you have vacations, you got to fill people in. So if this doesn't gel with the work week, I think that also creates a problem. So all of those things need to be completely understood.
What is the police department telling you?
Well, there's the police department and there's the Fraternal Order of Police, who looks out for its police officers, as they probably should, and making sure in negotiations they get everything that they can get. But at the same time, I think there has to be some consideration as to what the city itself can afford to do. I mean, 4 and 3 is not something the city can afford to do. overtime at $1.6 million every pay period is not something the city can afford to do. We cannot afford $40 million in overtime. We just can't afford it. When I think about what is needed to clean the city up as it relates to trash and what aid we can provide to the schools, and I say that aid to the schools because in 1997 when we separated those two budgets, you know, the school system has a $1.4 billion budget, and the city has a $2.6 billion operating budget and another $1 million that we use for capital projects. So we've got to clean up the city, provide police, provide fire, provide aid, pay for pensions, health care, and all of these other things for every agency. You know, all of those things have to be looked at carefully. And so this overtime thing is very concerning to me. I mean, we have limited resources. Nobody wants property taxes to go up. Certainly I don't. And I know nobody else does. And we want people moving in our city and want to create incentives for people to do that. And so, you know, as I say, oftentimes it gives new meaning to what my mother used to say to me growing up: you can't get blood out of a turnip. Didn't know what it meant. But when she looked at me and said, I don't have a money tree, the city doesn't have one either, that I can just shake and the money comes tumbling down. We have a fiduciary responsibility to run the city effectively and efficiently. But people pay taxes so that they can get services, and we have a responsibility to do that as well.
Since announcing the audit, I think it was last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, have you noticed, or has the budget office noticed any decrease in the amount of overtime?
Well, I would love to take a look at that. In fact, I have a meeting with the budget office coming up very shortly.
Do you support, are you a supporter of the commissioner's move to de-emphasize these plainclothes units?
Absolutely.
I mean, what, have you had that conversation with them? Where do you stand on that?
I'm supportive. I believe it is the right direction to go in. I think people need to see and know who their police officers are, and the more visible the blue uniform is, I think the better it is for our communities.
Madam Mayor, yesterday the police announced 2 suspensions of officers in relation to the investigation into the federally indicted officers. What more discipline, what more changes in the department can we expect when it relates to the fallout from the federal indictments?
Well, I really don't know. I think that this is, you heard the state's attorney. We've got cases now that have been dropped as a result of these investigations. Again, I think it's bad for the city, but I don't think that this is the end of what we're going to see. I'm supporting our police commissioner in the direction that he wants to take our police department, but I just think that we have to be conscious, conscious enough to say that we realize that this is not every police officer that serves the citizens of Baltimore, that for the most part they come to protect and serve. But as I've always said, whether you wear the blue uniform or blue jeans, we want everyone to do their job right and in the best interest of the city.
This was your first big snow as mayor? I don't know how big it was. But
Big to me. I wore my puffy coat yesterday. I've been waiting to wear it all year. Not that I wanted it to snow. Certainly didn't want it to snow after the situation with the school system. Hold it down. So I think our departments did a really great job. We had a new operations person, David, holding his first press conference on yesterday and sitting down there in good command of his department and the Department of Transportation. The 300 children young people who were on the street, who were helping to clear the sidewalks. It was really good to see the neighborhoods be cleaned and the sidewalks to be cleaned so that our young people could get to school today.
So how do you think that, I haven't heard many complaints at all.
In fact, I got a lot of texts and emails and tweets saying, we did a good job yesterday. But that's what the citizens of Baltimore expect. It's what they deserve, and I'm glad we were able to accommodate.
Madam Mayor, how did the idea of using unused snow removal funds and transferring that to city schools, how did that come about?
Well, what I said to the finance department was that I was looking under every, in every nook and cranny that we could find to provide support for our school system. But they've got to do what they need to do as it relates to right-sizing the school system, and we know that we have a shrinking population, and we have a shrinking population in the school system, And as I said, the good news is that the growth is in the elementary school level, but in that middle and high school, we've got people going to high schools and buildings that were built for 1,000 and 300 people are in the building. That's a problem. And at some point, you've got to figure out how do you merge, and then you got this growth of charter schools, charter public schools. And I tell people, just do the math. You got 30 some odd charter schools in the city with an average of 50 folks working in those buildings. That's 1,500 people that don't have to be hired out of this system. So, they've got a lot of work to do, and I'm looking forward to the transparency that it should exist with the school system to make sure that we're utilizing the funds that myself, working with Maggie McIntosh and my team to provide what's needed for the school system.
By looking in every nook and cranny, trying to find whatever money you can to help city schools, what kind of risk potentially does that put the city budget into?
Well, it puts us in a risky position because we also had to go into our rainy day fund. And so what I've got to make sure is that we don't drain the rainy day fund to a certain level because, as you well know, we have a AA bond rating currently. We want to maintain that AA bond rating because when we talk about going out and working in neighborhoods and fixing neighborhoods and saying to folks, to developers and so forth, downtown is wonderful, thumbs up, we need it. We're grateful for what's happening over in Port Covington, but these neighborhoods, Fulton Avenue, Druid Heights, Northwood, Old Town Mall area, Park Heights, all these neighborhoods deserve the same kind of attention, and we want to be able to provide that. The only way we're able to provide that is through some of the funding, whether it's floating bonds and TIFs and so forth, and sending them up into those neighborhoods. So we want to maintain that AA bond rating. But I understand, when advocates, look, I walk through the supermarket. I know this lady said to me the other day, she keep helping the schools. And I know when I did the 360-degree turnaround and said, well, let me just say that we're going to help the schools, but the schools got to help the schools. I know she said, that is not what I needed to hear from her today. But, that's how I feel every day, that I've got to explain what needs to be done. And we have a CEO of the school system. I just keep reminding the public, we have a CEO of the school system, and they should be held accountable, and their board should be held accountable. Structural deficits just don't appear just like that. Structural deficits show themselves ahead of time. And so we've got to, address those issues. It's the same thing with the city. When we have structural issues, we have to figure out how do we shift certain things so that it doesn't impact our budget overall, and it certainly doesn't impact our AA bond rating, so we can do the work.
On Monday, the City Council is likely to approve the minimum wage bill. It was a 12-3 vote on second reader. Your finance department has said this could impact both the city schools budget and the city budget. But there's a lot of advocates cheering it on, and they see it as a way to lift up people. Where are you with it? Will you sign it if it comes to you or not?
So let me just say a couple things. One of the things that happens in Annapolis that I think should happen here is whenever a bill is presented, there is a financial analysis and impact that is done for every piece of legislation. I believe this council should have financial analysis of every piece of legislation that they produce before them. It really does help you to make decisions that are in the best interest of the city. I remember, for example, when I was in Annapolis and I presented moving the compulsory attendance age to 18, and I remember Miller screaming I shouldn't say screaming, but Miller saying to the chair of the Budget and Tax Committee, did you all look at this bill? Have you read the financial impact that it has on the city? He said, this bill has a $50 million impact on the city. And you use those analyses to make a determination as to what is best for the state, what's best for the citizens. But in that analysis, what I learned was that there's some things that did not exist that could have helped lower the cost. For example, so what I did was turn that bill into a study. So I said, State of Maryland, tell me what I need to do in order to move the compulsory attendance age to 18. And here's what I learned. First of all, there were no alternative schools in the state of Maryland. So if a child was sitting in a classroom that's troubled, you had to keep them in the classroom. It was disruptive. So I passed legislation requiring every jurisdiction in the state of Maryland to have alternative schools. So that took 2 years. Got that done. Then it said there was no suspension policy. So everybody was suspending, willy-nilly. And so I put a suspension policy in place. It also said that if I wanted to take the GED, I would have to drop out of school for 90 days. Made no sense to me. So I closed that gap. But in the meantime, when I first started, Baltimore City was the #1 dropout school system in the state. As I put all of those things in place, based on that analysis, the dropout rate in Baltimore City began to decline. In fact, when I left the General Assembly, I think we were the third. We were behind Baltimore County. We were behind Prince George's County. And that kind of analysis helps you to make decisions, I think, that are in the best interest of all. So it was not until year 7 that I was able to implement that bill, because what I was also able to do was to show them, based on what was happening as a result of the things that I had put in place, that the cost of educating our children were far greater than the incarceration of our children. And so I was able to pass that legislation. So I think if the council had that same kind of analysis, whether we all believe or not that people should have a higher wage, when to implement that wage, I think that kind of analysis would have been able to have been shared with the city council. So where am I currently on the minimum wage bill? We want everybody to have a great wage. But we also know that in our city are people who've not been trained. I do have an amendment to the bill that requires a lower wage for people who are training, and that amendment is in the bill. I am going to review it thoroughly, still have some conversations with city council people, and someone said, I think I read a piece where it says weighing the impact of the business community and the community in general, or the advocates. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is analyzing the impact of this particular piece of legislation on Baltimore City in its totality, because I have to make a decision as to whether or not we move forward, we delay it, which is a possibility, or we don't sign it at all. But we will see. And so I have a little bit of time to complete my analysis and my thoughtfulness, as I try to do with every piece of legislation that will ever come before me, and more importantly, in terms of how I move the city forward.
Have you set a deadline for yourself?
For my own analysis? No, I haven't. I know that I'm timed. There is a time frame.
3 weeks after.
Yeah, I think 3 weeks. So I can't go beyond the 3 weeks.
One other thing that is totally off topic, but I'm working on a story about, there's this, and I don't know if this reached your desk yet or not, but there's a plan to have a 35-mile trail loop in Baltimore.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah, we already have 2/3.
Wait a minute, is that the bike trail or the?
This would be a walking, running.
Yeah, because the walkers and the runners would appreciate that.
Yeah, it's not like a bike. It's not like bike lanes, but it's actual trails, and it connects the Glen Falls to the Jones Falls.
Which I think is really cool.
Yeah, and so there's already 22 miles or something done.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's come to you yet.
Not yet.
Okay, so,
but I like it.
Yeah. Any thoughts? I know you're a big runner.
I'm a big runner, and I like it, and I like seeing people walk. I mean, I love what I see in Druid Hill Park in the morning when I'm riding by. And one of the things I wish we could figure out is how we connect it back over to, what is it, the Hamden area, the...
Get rid of the JFX?
Yeah. Or at least be able to go over the... Yeah. But somehow that we be able to connect folks on both sides, because I've tried walking, across that bridge over there, and it's a little slim. There's some other areas that I'd like to work on, but I love the connection piece, absolutely.
Back to the police department's overtime for a second. Do they have an internal control?
They will.
And on the minimum wage bill topic, what do you make of how the city council has handled the process so far? I know a couple weeks ago you said that you thought that they might be kind of rushing it. Do you think that that's still the case? Because it seems like they are trying to move very quickly on this.
I'm thoughtful. It's moving pretty fast. Again, not having that analysis and the availability of the kind of analysis that I think that really works in Annapolis, I think would work better for the council.
Madam Mayor, just with tomorrow, with the State of the City address that you're working on, what are...
Oh, you don't want a preview of that,
Is there what's really good? What are you going to say that you haven't said yet?
Probably all of the things that I've been saying. Just lump them up into one big comment on where I think the city is and some of the things that I think that we can do. Some, you know, a lot of it is aspirational, I think. But along with the aspirations have come some connections to make some of those things happen. So, you know, it won't be new to me. It may be new to some of you. It probably won't be new to you all because you've heard me say a lot of the things that you'll hear tomorrow as well. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.